We all use the cloud constantly, but the cloud isn't abstract, it's physical. It exists in buildings, large, complex and increasingly essential places that are reshaping our infrastructure and our planning systems. In many ways, data centers are becoming the critical infrastructure of the 21st century, underpinning everything from financial to artificial intelligence and public services. And yet they are often misunderstood. What are they? They're seen as anonymous, energy-intensive and inward-looking, sometimes difficult to reconcile with the places they occupy. So today is about opening that up. What are data centers really? Why are they growing so quickly? And how should we plan and design for them? I'm joined by Martin Wright today, Chief Architect at Pure Data Centers Group, alongside my colleague San Stevens, who leads our Advanced Technologies sector, to explore the challenges, opportunities, and future of this rapidly expanding sector. So to set the scene, we're going to start with what are data centers? And I'd like to turn to you first, Martin. How would you describe the modern data center in simple terms?
I'll do my best. So data centers, as you say, they're a key part of the digital infrastructure that we all rely upon. Essentially, they are a place where information is stored, exchanged and processed, probably is the most significant role that they now have. Essentially, they are large halls full of racks and racks of computer servers, but supporting that, you've got cooling and you've got all of the power infrastructure needed to support the servers as well. And then beyond that, you have logistics facilities, other support accommodation, welfare offices, control rooms, storage, etc.
And just very briefly, Martin, are there different types of data center?
There are, and there are lots of different terms used around the industry. So probably the most prevalent form now are what we call hyperscale data centers. Yeah. The term hyperscale actually comes from sort of hyperscalability of the IT that was in there, but it's become associated with a lot of the big technology companies, so the likes of Apple and Google and Amazon Web Services and Microsoft. So they are the hyperscalers, and they build and require facilities of a certain scale. There's a lot of reference to edge data centers. So yes, that's perhaps smaller facilities at the edge of the network. You have enterprise data centers, which are perhaps privately owned by individual companies to fulfill their IT needs. And then more and more now we're seeing the term AI data center. I think AI is something that is coming into perhaps all those different types of data centers in some form or other.
And in terms of the Big Seven and AI, can you just very briefly tell us what is driving this surge in demand? Because it seems to be global.
Well, I think it's something that we've certainly seen in our industry in the last couple of years, a massive shift towards growth in that sector. I think it's been fueled by advances in the chip technology and the fact that processors are getting more powerful, and therefore people can do things that they couldn't do before. But I think the tools that has then unlocked have become more and more accessible to people and in demand by people, and businesses of all sorts are seeing how that they can employ AI to make themselves more efficient. So it really is driving, certainly in the US, it's driving the American economy significantly. Yeah. And there is a great scramble around the world to not be left out. So China and US are perhaps the dominant forces, but Europe is seen as somewhere that needs to catch up.
There's a huge amount of money being invested, lots of it still at risk as such. I don't think Elon Musk has made much money out of data.
No, I mean, that's a big question as to how AI is actually going to be monetized. I don't begin to pretend to understand how that works. But clearly, people can see that there is an investment a deal to be done here, investment to be made there. And that's, so a lot of companies are investing huge amounts of money in trying to build the infrastructure that they predict needed.
I was going to say, as the architect, providing the services to deliver these, what are the most important components to you, or do you see what I mean? What does it mean to you as an architect? If you get a brief for a data center, what springs to mind immediately?
Well, I mean, it's similar to a lot of projects. Like the context is number one. What's the surroundings? How's it sitting? How are people going to experience that building? Whether it's from up close or from a distance, passing at pace on public transport. The context requirement is the same for almost every architectural project we look at. Key pieces within the sector around efficiency of layout, wanting to build less, minimizing the carbon impact of the buildings. Building less, therefore, should be more efficient. Internal space versus external space. So external space being a gantry space where you might have equipment that's positioned to help power the building or cool it. And the balance of those, and that generating a interesting design challenge in itself. And then critical to it is how it's going to be operated, how is it maintained, how is it going to be constructed and phased, opportunities for modular construction that allow work to take place off-site, which can improve quality, reduce construction program. A number of these items are all pulling together to form the design challenge.
Is there anything that says, this is a great site for data? What are the parameters? What do you need to actually make that thing operative and work?
So a lot of our projects to date have been in kind of key European centres where there's already an established data centre presence. And that's largely because that's where our customers, the hyperscalers, have their availability zones. So they talk about FLAP D as the core market. So Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, Dublin. Those are the cities that were other sort of the forefront of where data centers first landed. There's now more and more secondary markets. But for us, first and foremost is that where our customers have their availability zones. And we shouldn't forget that obviously the data centers are part of the digital infrastructure, but there's an awful lot of money that gets invested in the sort of networks that they set up, that the customers set up. So for them to establish a new availability zone is a massive piece of investment that they would need to do. So if we are a data center developer and operator looking to attract a customer, selling them something that's already in an availability zone that they have is clearly going to help us, and that's where the demand is. So the availability zones is one thing. Obviously, finding the land with the power is then the next thing, and that's an increasingly difficult challenge, particularly in those metro regions where there's a scarcity of sites and a scarcity of power. Beyond that, I think most of the sites, or probably all of the sites that we've developed in those sort of metro urban areas have been brownfield former industrial sites. So I guess in some ways they were very well suited to data center development, but they come with constraints and challenges, spatial constraints being probably one of the key things. And
sure.
We've seen from projects that Sam and I have worked on, the difficulties that come from trying to fit large facilities into tight urban spaces.
What's your experience of that, Sam? Because I know that we're doing data centers in different environments, whether it's brownfield, it has potentially been rural as well. Is there anything that speaks of, because we talk about these becoming national infrastructure, or maybe they are. What are, again, I asked Martin what the parameters are, but in terms of the experience of where you've been trying to get them through planning, how's that been in terms of the urban, the rural,
I think we've seen data center projects in all kinds of locations, and it's probably something that's becoming more varied because the land opportunities where there's power is becoming more complex or less easy to establish. Traditionally, I think we've probably seen them, like Martin's highlighted, in previously industrial locations, which this sort of makes sense to put data centers in those kind of locations. But as those sites get used up, where is the next location going to be? And inevitably, it means that where some are hidden in the back of industrial estates, new sites are going to become more obvious and more visible to the public. So people have spent a long time going about using their phones, using data, but not really knowing where this was. And now they're starting to see it more in a more obvious location because the site opportunities have have had to widen.
I think there's another factor as well,
absolutely.
which comes with AI. So a lot of the core availability zones that we're seeing in the metro centres has come from low latency, so putting the compute close to where the kind of the bulk of the use is.
Yes.
With some of the AI functions, some of those latency issues don't exist, and so I think that is opening up opportunities, in the UK to put data centres in regions where perhaps they wouldn't have been a core market for us a couple of years ago.
I think there's one other thing that's probably going to see more and more of, and that is where our power is coming from, and an increased ability to access renewable energy, and finding locations where it might be opportunities nearer where the renewable energy is being generated or where it's landing.
Do you think, either of you, the current planning system in this country is keeping pace with the demand from the client side, first of all, and then the architects as well?
I think there's a bit of catching up to do. I've been in a lot of meetings with local authorities where one of the starting points has always been what is the building use class as a starting point.
Yeah.
Most of them seem to be settling on the idea that a data center is a B8 use class, which is industrially focused. But then the majority of the conversations after that, other than the obvious things about how is it designed, how is it experienced, how does it sit within the surroundings, a lot of the difficult conversations are then about how does it, all the things that make it different to a B8 use, such as the number of users in the building, the number of parking spaces, how do you balance security requirements in the local area. So from that point of view, it hasn't really caught up yet. I know that it's being discussed, and I suppose it might be being accelerated with the redesignation as critical national infrastructure. I hope so, because it would save a lot of time in the discussions and negotiations during the planning process. Is that your feelings as well, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an industry, there's probably a lot more that we can do to help kind of inform policy and to help educate. So in our experience, different local authorities in the UK certainly have different levels of experience or understanding of what a data centre is, and that can make the process easier or harder. But even, like some of the local authorities in West London, where there is already a well-established, existing quantum of data centres, they're still struggling with some of the basic concepts. We've actually taken, for example, we had Transport for London come and visit one of our facilities to help them better understand some of the issues that we wrestle with. So things like that, I think, will help, but policy is going to take a little while to catch up.
What I'd like to do now is to move on to design and architecture of these facilities, these objects. And they have been described anonymous, utilitarian, and the modernists amongst us will say, utilitarian, what's wrong with that? But start with you, Sam, or talk about it together. But how do you find, form and function, clearly they're doing what they have to do. But where do you find yourself in the architectural debate around what you're trying to achieve, and what sort of resistance you come across, Sam? How is it working?
Oh, this is a big question, isn't it? As architects, our role is to design a building that works well, sits within its context in an appropriate and well-considered manner, and it has to go through the planning process like any other building typology. So obviously local authorities want to see what this is going to look like. They want to feel like they're part of the journey, influencing it, and that's making a positive impact on its surroundings. It's not just about the functional requirements that need to drive part of the design process. Every project gives us an opportunity to solve the contextual challenge in the most appropriate way. I think just addressing one of those key points about whether something's utilitarian or not, I think because something's functional, it doesn't have to result in something that's sort of utilitarian in a negative way, or doesn't have to be anonymous design. With careful consideration of the function and how internal spaces and external spaces come together, the scale and form that the natural processes that take place can shape the building and into interesting proportions and texture that's linked with ventilation, and great design can come from that. And responding to the surroundings and how that has to manifest itself both in terms of function and the neighboring surroundings is something we would look at in every scheme. I think as architects, our role is to try and make this work on every project, and it's working within the pieces that you've got to work with.
And clearly, Martin, you want your facilities to be delivered smoothly, to operate well, but not to create the wrong type of atmosphere. So how does that chime with what you're trying to do as a business in terms of the aesthetics and the look and things like that?
I guess if I'm wearing my developer's hat, there's probably a bit of our business that would say we don't want to spend any more money on anything than we need to. But I think we also recognise that we do need to get planning permissions and building permits. And I think as professionals in the built environment, we are creating the built environment and buildings that are going to be visible. So, and to me, I think that's where good design comes in. I think it can be both, and I think it can be very cost effective. And absolutely, I echo Sam's point that we should take the architecture should follow the form of the building, and there is elegance and beauty that can come out of that. Absolutely. Even to the point where more and more now we have more equipment exposed on the outside of the building, but actually, that's part of the workings of the building. And if it's arranged in a purposeful way, there could be elegance and beauty in that. So I think we need to work with those things. There are, of course, things that we can do, with screening, where we have architectural tricks that we can play to make things, to add depth and texture and interest and patterns and stuff. There are, to a certain extent, there are benefits in designing buildings where we don't have a lot of occupants and a lot of windows, because we've got a blanker canvas to work with. I'm sure there are examples, well, there's plenty of examples where people have just built a very boring vanilla shed. There are also lots of schemes around London where, people have articulated the facades in an elegant way. So.
Do you think that this is something that's going to be constantly changing as well? As we've been through the period of data centres primarily being in maybe brownfield industrial sites, that generates one architectural response. And as data centres find themselves nearer other building typologies and other settings, how they respond to those surroundings and the different building uses that they may have previously been next to, that's going to inevitably change the architectural response. And
there's the other extreme where if we're going to bigger campuses in more rural areas, which we're seeing, exactly. We've got a big campus up in Finland. There we've got plenty of space that allows us to arrange the technical components of the building in a different way, in a way that's perhaps more cost effective and quicker to build, and that leads to a different architectural expression. But in that location, perhaps the design emphasis is on the landscaping and things like that.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because as architects and developers, we know every site is actually different. There are very rarely are two. The parameters are always slightly different. So if you're building in Finland, you've got that extra land, the way you can dispose of the bill, as you say. So, that is the fascination. I think, it's interesting to me because, this whole business of boring, repetition, modularity is not necessarily boring. These buildings are doing what they need to do, putting a lot of the services on the outside. That's honest. If we were futurists in 1920s Italy, we'd be celebrating that. So, I think there's lots to be said that these are honest buildings, even though much of it's internalized. I think in terms of the language of these buildings, what we need to speak about a bit now too, to both of you, is the functionality. So energy use, carbon, things like that. Is there anything one can do to help ameliorate those factors, or is it the nature of the typology that it has to consume this type of energy?
Well, the energy consumption is a factor of the amount of compute that you have in there. So what as designers, what we can look at is trying to make the buildings as efficient as possible. So as much of the energy that goes into the facility is used for compute rather than for cooling or for other, other loads. So the big metric that the data center industry talks about is the power utilization effectiveness, the PUE. So the ratio of the gross power coming into the actual megawatts of IT that you've got in the facility. So there is legislation in the EU now that's driving us to have tighter and tighter or lower and lower PUEs. Lots of kind of developments from a mechanical engineering point of view, particularly that are helping to get the PUE down. But what we have to recognize is the amount of compute that these facilities are doing is growing exponentially. If you took that compute and distributed back into sort of on-premises facilities, the amount of energy used would be way, way higher. So it's always, these buildings are super efficient. It's just that our demand for the compute is just growing exponentially. So it's a real issue for us, for everybody, because you've got to find sites for the power. The power has to be available. We don't want to be taking power away from other uses. One of the things that is being talked about more and more now is the sort of bring your own power solution. So, for example, on our site in Dublin, we've established what we're seeing as Europe's first microgrid, where we're actually generating our own power on site using biogas. So it's low carbon power that we're self-generating because there isn't the capacity in the local network.
So I was going to say also, just taking one step up from that as well, and it's about when you find a site that is suitable for a data center, it's making the most of it. So if there's a site that's appropriate, make it a bigger building, fit more on. If you can fit more in one building, then you're building less overall across several sites. So that's a great way of the whole system, the whole network being more efficient, and not just considering it on a sort of a building by building basis. Make these sites more dense.
No, I understand that, and I think we're seeing in the States, we're seeing a lot of very big campuses, and I think what you may be suggesting is bringing some together in a campus. But there's a question that people will have, and again, to both of you, neighbours. So if you're told that local planning authority is looking at a data centre, how would you approach the psychology of telling the story about how a data center can be a good neighbor? I don't want to say a better neighbor, a good neighbor.
I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about data centers, which doesn't help us. So I think we need to recognize that people have real anxiety about big developments happening in their backyard, and I think that's understandable. So, and different sites will bring different challenges with that, but I think it's also being honest and clear about what those challenges are. So we've, as an industry, we've perhaps faced this issue where, first of all, data centers have been invisible and people haven't necessarily even understood that they existed. We're seeing that change now, I think, with more and more sort of focus on data centers in the mainstream media. But a lot of that is perhaps a more negative story. These big energy guzzling, water guzzling campuses. I think people perhaps see what is happening in other parts of the world and maybe are conflating that with what they're seeing locally. So for example, on the issue of water usage, yes, there are facilities that do use a lot of water in their cooling processes, evaporative cooling. As a policy, we don't use any evaporative cooling. So yes, there is closed loop water systems that cool the facility, but we're not. The demand of on the water grid is no different from any other small domestic premises, because it's just the toilets and the showers and that kind of stuff. So I think if we can overcome a few of these myths and also help people understand that actually there's going to be lower traffic. So if you're developing a site which might have had a logistics facility on before and you're now putting a data center, it's probably better for the local air quality and for local noise, because you've got less logistics, less traffic. The buildings, unfortunately, they need to be secure as part of what they do. So I don't think we're going to see a world where they become buildings that people can sort of wander up to. And but I think there are things that we can do more and more. If we've got sites of the right size, maybe we can give land back to local communities for their purposes. There's precedence of that. Greenhouses on the roofs of data centers or allotments next to them. So we need to work harder at that. Our scheme in North London that Scott Brownrigg designed, we're putting what will be the world's biggest living wall on there. The intention behind that was to try and capture particulate matter off the busy road network around there, and to improve air quality, to soften the visual appearance of the building, to provide biodiversity. So that's an additional cost, which as a developer, we perhaps wouldn't have done in another location, but we felt for that location it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, there is a question. We don't need to discuss it in detail today, but I mean, it's how much the sector values architecture. And I think we do know, Sam can answer this, but I think that a lot of the schemes you do, Sam, I suspect that you are always looking at the social value outside the fundamental delivery side of sharing and storing data. Could you just give us a few examples of how that works for you?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's two scales of this, isn't there? There's the starting point of looking at each individual project. That's the challenge in hand. That's what we're looking to do at that point. And at the beginning of the projects, we have chats within the project team with the client. What are the opportunities there? What's nearby? What's really good for the area? And that would be the same on any project. But we've been talking for some time now about how, not how do we make data centers better neighbors? I know you said better, but you're right to not say better, because they can be good neighbors like straight away. And you look at it from lots of different levels. You talk about local area and business rates, getting income that could be invested in the local community. You've got opportunities with potential chains of development where data centers and the waste heat they give off could feed into district heat network. Obviously, there's challenges about whether that district heat network exists, who's building it. But that's something that is something that all the energy is coming in. It should be reused. We've been talking about this as chains of development, and that ongoing chain of energy use forming potentially nice little circular chains, such as this idea we were talking about data center to take away waste heat from a data center going into some kind of indoor agriculture, and then using that food grown there that goes into a dark kitchen, and someone orders their food online from the dark kitchen using the data center. If we can establish more of these kind of things, the data center and its place in the community can be better established and more appropriate to the local area.
I think one of the other things that we're focusing on is job creation, skills training, and that's a big focus. Certainly in London, in the discussions we've had. I was at a forum last week in OPDC with other data center operators, where we were talking about what we're all doing, what we can do more to improve I guess the visibility of the sector as a potential career path, and what programs and initiatives can be put in place. Sure. And that's good for the local community. It's good for us as a sector as well, because we are facing a skills crisis and shortage, and we want to get more people into it. So
well, I think it's very interesting. So we've moved from what is a data center. We've moved through to the context which we need to build them in, the planning. We've touched on energy and sustainability and resources, but let's just come to that, back to that. And they are criticised for their energy use, or have been. And I know that you're thinking about, you've just told us something about creating your own energy. What are the realistic opportunities for reusing waste heat or recycling energy within the sector?
Well, I think waste heat is the obvious. That's the holy grail that I think we'd all like to get to. So effectively, all of our facilities have the ability to capture waste heat and export it. The bit that's difficult for us is what happens outside of our site boundary. if there isn't a district heating network there to plug into, then that's something that we can't control. We've got facilities in Europe where they perhaps are more advanced in the development of waste heat networks, and they're so nothing's live yet, but we have 2 schemes that are through permitting where we will be connecting to the local district heating network. And on one of those schemes, we've given over land because we had it to allow the local district heat network operator to put their own infrastructure to provide a boosting station. So one of the challenges, if you've got a tight urban site, we have a lot of heat, but it's low grade heat in terms of the temperature. If you're then taking that away from the site, taking heat at a low temperature is you need bigger pipes. It's less efficient than actually if you can boost the heat to a higher temperature, which is what a district heat network needs. So I guess the ideal solution would be that we had enough land on all of our sites to enable the heating network companies to put their infrastructure as well, and that perhaps makes it more a viable proposition.
So this is a conversation that you will have experienced as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember it must have been 3 or 4 years ago now that I had this flurry of people messaging me about this article. I think it must have been on the BBC about a swimming pool that was being heated by a server. And I was like, we must have got to do this more in data centers. Yeah, absolutely. We all know about this. But what at the time I was just hearing more and more is, we need district heat network. We need to reuse the heat. But we were like, well, what's the scale of this? Yeah. So we set about a challenge at the time to try and understand what kind of quantity of waste heat comes from what kind of IT capacity data centers, and what kind of waste heat could be used by different scales of development and different building typologies. And we developed this, at the time we called it like a developers integrated toolkit, where you could say, right, we've got 4,000 homes here. As a local authority, if we wanted to give free heating to those 4,000 homes, what size data center should we be planning in that area to contribute to that? And then the flip side of it is, there's a 50 megawatt data center being developed over here. What could that heat? And then looking at all these different things. So we wanted to try and get away from this like concept of waste heat to some tangibles about what the scale means and what could it do. And it needs a stepping back from the day-to-day projects to look at it from local authority, government, and say, right, if we're planning out where our housing is going to be going in the future, well, let's plan in some locations for this. And there are other things, obviously, you've got to worry about that. Where's the power coming from? Where's the fibre? All of that. But if we can think at that strategic level, we can be joining up a few more dots. Obviously, as soon as there's more people involved, things get more complicated. Yeah. And it becomes harder for data center developers to be doing what they're doing. But there must be something in strategically thinking about where these could go.
Is there anything else you'd like to say on that sector? Because after that, I'm going to move on to community and people and the data center. Is there anything you want to tell us about, the use of energy sustainability at all that you've experienced? Or, for instance, the Green Wall on the London project. It's a big building by a very busy road. And it's very easy for people to criticize, tokenism or whatever, but you've been quite serious about this, I think, in terms of trying to mitigate, climatic, air quality, etc.
Yeah, I guess we're trying to do it at a scale where it has some meaning, and I think it will be an interesting process to actually sort of monitor what that does achieve as it goes forward, in terms of particulate matter capture, in terms of kind of carbon capture is fairly minimal in terms of the plants. But what we are also looking at, and this is another thing that we've been pioneering as a sort of a side piece, we have a sister company, A Healthier Earth, that have been looking at sort of industrial production of biochar as a means of capturing carbon. But then circling back to data centers, how can we use biochar as a either to displace other construction materials, or in the case of the living wall, to displace the growing medium? So we're locking the carbon that we've captured in the biochar into the growing medium of the living wall. It improves the moisture content, the moisture retention content of the living wall. So it keeps the plants healthier for longer with less irrigation. So there's a really nice sort of circularity there, and we're quite advanced in the trials, the growing trials that have been testing that.
I think, as just on that, the flip side of that is like, I totally understand the point about, in comparison to the energy being used, what impact does that have? The flip side of it is you've got large buildings with large blank facades in certain locations, like that site which is near a very busy road, and if there was an opportunity to do something, should we not be doing something? Is it better not to do something than do nothing?
Yeah.
This was something we looked at within the team actually, about blank facades and
Exactly. Yeah.
process-driven buildings. Are other facades of process-driven buildings the sort of forgotten piece of the city? What could they be? Could they be a green wall that is doing something positive to the surroundings? Could they be something that's generating power? Could they be something that is interacting with the surroundings in some kind of interactive screen or something like that?
There's a precedent, isn't there, in West London of a large-scale artwork, isn't there?
Yes, exactly.
So
Yes, I think this sort of heroic scale of building, sometimes there are opportunities, and these things can become cultural touchstones for people. And I think, as you said, Sam, we ran an esquisse, didn't we, on what are we going to do with these facades? And it's a huge opportunity. Very few buildings have that facade with that requirement on it.
Yeah, but also if we are in a situation where the data centers are going to find themselves nearer and nearer to where people go on a day-to-day basis, then their need to be doing something that contributes to the local area becomes even more important. We went to the extent that obviously there's always challenges with things like security, but could we go to the extent that this facade is basically something it's not a forgotten facade, it's just something awaiting a purpose. Yeah. And that purpose could be something like, could we do vertical allotments up it? Could people in an area that don't have big enough outdoor space to grow their own food, could they have some space on the side of a building if it's orientated right? Some of this stuff, I'm sure, as developers, Martin, people are going to, that's never going to happen. But just trying to think about the opportunity and out of the box thinking.
I think the more we talk, the more they do spark your imagination, actually. These sort of silent temples, to me, I see them almost. I was thinking about the parallel between a Greek and a Roman temple. I mean, for the gods, Zeus or whoever, read the cloud. I mean, it's this ambient thing. This is, the temple itself holds that, but it comes out, and these are quite similar. They're introverted. They are very precious buildings, and in some ways they are. I think the more we talk about them, the more symbolic they could be. They're quite symmetrical often. They're balanced. They have clean corners. They've got kit out-rigged off them. But the scale of what we've talked about in terms of artworks, fine-grained cladding, scale, vertical allotments, artworks, there are huge opportunities. And I think the more people know about the typology, hopefully the better it will get. What will the data center of 2050 look like? My sort of simple mind thinks, well, once upon a time computers used to be enormous, now they're tiny. Is there any chance that data centers are going to shrink?
Well, the technology continues to evolve, and I think the demand is growing at the same time. So, what we've seen even in the last 3 or 4 years is computer rack densities going from maybe 10 or 11 kilowatts up to, people are talking about a whole megawatt in a rack now, which is an immense densification in a small footprint. That doesn't necessarily translate to the building getting smaller, because they still need space around them. They need network infrastructure, storage. Then you've got all of the power infrastructure. So when you kind of multiply that out to the site area you need, I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where stuff's just going to disappear into nothing. So it's difficult to predict exactly where the technology is going to go, but the laws of physics are going to constrain us at some point. But maybe we will see, different models emerge where one of the things that we're interested in is actually is the thing that's going to drive the design of data centers going to become more to do with the way that the servers within the facility are networked together in the fiber optics, and does that actually change the shape of the data center, and is that the critical diagram? And actually the things like the power and the cooling, which have been dominant forces today, become secondary to that, and we start arranging the buildings to get the optimum fiber diagram, because then the speed, the interconnectivity between these different servers working together as a single brain increases. So that's an interesting technical design exploration, but it could result in some very interesting architectural forms.
But I can see how excited. I mean, I can see that you can see the potential of this, not unknown territory, but it's there and it's coming. Sam, what do you see in 25 years' time?
I mean, what a great question. It's interesting. A couple of weeks ago, I actually asked the team their opinion on this, because I thought it would prompt quite an interesting discussion, and we had quite a variety of answers, from the sort of flippant answer that you sort of highlighted of smaller, which, as Martin said, that may not be the case, but the idea that technology changes and we've gone from phones that are this big to this big, maybe some elements of the data center get smaller. I think some of what was said were chimed quite nicely with some aspects of data centers that are an improvement of other building typologies, like logistics or industrial, where they potentially take up less footprint, which means the surrounding site can give more land back to ecological biodiversity focuses. The idea that ecologically integrated piece of infrastructure seamlessly and harmlessly embedded into the urban landscape. The idea that industrial areas were once blockers for biodiversity in a city could be transformed to being connectors through having denser footprint buildings like data centers with more green space on the rest of the site. But I think a key thing that I sort of followed up with this was an integrated part of the community, like a school or a hospital, where the local community benefits from being near to one in a tangible way. A variety of scales. So we talked about this a bit earlier, didn't we? And different functions, where smaller facilities in towns and cities might have to become more civic because they're they're located in greater proximity, smaller proximity. And I suppose the other point was, with the densification of the racks in there, will we get to a point where we won't need any more data center buildings? Will we get to a point where the actual existing buildings just get refitted more and more in a more and more dense manner, so we fit more into what we've already got? I'm not sure if that's quite the answer, but I think that there could be something in getting more out of the existing building stock in the future.
I suppose what I'd say is, what gives you the most satisfaction when you're designing a data center? What is the trick? What are you trying to pull off to make it a success in terms of what it does to the outside world as well as the inside world?
It's a great question. Again, I suppose it's very similar to a lot of other projects. You've got a number of competing challenges, people with different goals out of the project, whether that's being able to deliver something in a certain time frame, whether it's being able to deliver something to a certain budget, whether it's getting something through a planning process in an efficient manner that, like Martin said, for developers who are there for the long haul, as operators thinking about the community and the impact of them. It's the bringing together of all of these sometimes conflicting challenges into something that there's some largely some agreement on. So something that all of these people who've got different goals go, okay, we can, sure, we're happy with that. And it's got there's sides in there that have, maybe that's not what they were thinking at the start, but they've realized that some of these competing challenges have driven it that way, and actually the result gets through planning, keeps the local community happy, allows it to be built efficiently and to meet a speed to market challenge. And it's something that we can be proud of. And I think with the building typology from a design point of view, it's being honest about what it is, being clever with the way that we look at the form and the mass, the external space, the internal space, the way we create light and shadow and texture on these buildings, so that they're not just a anonymous box, as was mentioned earlier. Giving space that people have got somewhere that they can enjoy working as well. It's not just a internal functional space. It's where people have to go to work every day, and having a great aspect from their office, having some outdoor space to escape to, maybe. All of these things all come together to form like an overall thing that we hope to get to and achieve.
So thanks for joining us today. It's really insightful for me, unpacking that building typology, and also to explain us how these things work, Martin, to an extent, because it's quite hard to grasp what's actually going on inside the ranks.
The more I work on them, the less I know. So.
Well, there you are. And that's the nature of expertise, isn't it? So thank you very much, both.
Thank you.
Thank you.